I can't tell you how happy I am to be here for so many reasons. I'm not going to walk off the stage. I worked here from 1980 to 1988. And I was, it was fantastic. And maybe some of you look familiar with this one for sure. I was in charge of the docent program and family programs, blah, blah, blah. And then I taught at OSU for 10 years. And then I taught elementary school for 20 years. And I'm retired, which is awesome. And I'm just so glad you're here. This is a topic that is, I'm Susan Myers, by the way. It is near and dear to my heart. And I'll tell you why. So I went to art school in Cleveland at the Cleveland Institute of Art. I also got my education degree from Case Western Reserve. But when I was taking my art history classes, I was so excited, got the art history book, and I knew of one woman artist. And I looked it up. It was a 1970 version of Janssen's art history. She wasn't in there. And it was Mary Cassatt. I'm still peeved. I in fact looked, I found my art history book, and I'm like, no, it was in there. It's not there. So there, but we are going to talk a little bit about Mary Cassatt. So I'm a little out of practice. I'm used to teaching college, a whole semester, so I have all the time in the world. I'm going to run out of time. I can tell you right now. It's just going to happen because I don't want this to go over an hour. Neither do you. And so there are 13 artists, and there are a couple extras at the beginning. And I want to get to all of them. We'll see how far we get. Do any of these look familiar to you? Yes. Give me can you name the artist? Frida Kahlo. Okay. And what else? That's it. Okay, someone else? Oh, yes, Jeannie. Artemisia, you bet. Here she is. Okay, the work of hers in our permanent collection is on loan in Detroit. So we can't look at it right now. So I'm going to introduce you to most of these. Yeah. Where's Cassatt? Here she is. That's her self-portrait. And these are all the self-portraits. So let's see, I have notes. I don't really think I need them, but I'm going to use them. There is a famous article published in the 1970s entitled, "Why Have There Been No Great Women Artists?" Authored by the respected art historian Linda Nochlin. I remember when that article came out, and that title was a little upsetting. What do you mean? It was meant to be shocking, coming as it did during second wave feminism. It was first published as "Why Are There No Great Women Artists?" rather than "Why Have There Been No Great Women Artists?" And then it was eventually published in Art News, which is where I saw it. It was praised for its new slant on feminist art history and theory, examining, and I promise I won't go on with this, the institutional obstacles that prevent women from succeeding in the arts, in parentheses, music, medicine, everything. It's just, and women aren't the only ones. So I'm not going to rehash all the issues that Nochlin raised, although they'll come up because they will. And, but we're going to journey back farther than 500 years. Linda Nochlin, God rest her soul, she was a prominent art historian, Yale or one of those awesome places. And she started a conversation that needed to be started. And it was a time not only of the second wave feminist movement, but we were just coming off the civil rights movement. I mean, now we could, say, and there are all these other people who, human beings we need to pay attention to. So one of the books that I used for this, and I have it at the very end, it's called The Trouble with Women Artists, Reframing Art History. And I'm gonna a quote from there. No matter how talented they were, it was almost impossible for them to succeed institutionally or politically. Women were excluded from the art school, the system of apprenticeships, and the studios. When I was at the Cleveland Art Institute, I could go to life drawing class and nobody covered up. I was really nervous about it because it was a long time ago. But just a bit prior to that, women couldn't go into life drawing classes. We had to be protected or something. The heroic troupe of women who did succeed were composed almost entirely of artists' daughters and or lovers or wives of painters, at least until the 19th century. So now, were there women artists? Pliny the Elder, some ancient writer, claimed that there was, he called her Thamar, that women had invented painting, in fact. And that he listed like 7 female artists from before his time. And she lived in the 5th century BC, and this is painted in the 1400s. She's dressed in 1400s garb. So this is, it's not a self-portrait, but it does show her painting, again, strangely, a Madonna. Why would she be doing that in the 5th century BC? Okay. And then she's got an assistant, I don't know if it's a man or a woman, it doesn't matter, grinding pigment. And I've done that, that's hard work. This manuscript is in Paris, and Pliny, I want to keep wanting to say Pliny, but Pliny. He said, she scorned the duties of women and practiced her father's art. All right, so there's one whose dad was an artist. Cool. I'm all for that. All right, the next artist. I don't have a self-portrait of her. Well, maybe I do. Her name was Suor Portella Nelli. She was a nun, entered the convent at 14. She's the first woman to paint a giant Last Supper. She was from Florence. How did she learn? Good question. She was in the convent. I mean, so she was educated she got educated in the convent, which is how a lot of women got their education. And then she learned in the convent. And one of the amazing things is the drawings that they have actually located, the drawings of Fra Bartolomeo, a very important male artist. Her convent inherited all those drawings. And so you know what that means. Great, you have something physical to learn from. You can use them as tracings. So in any event, this is a piece by, and she's so interesting. From about 20 years ago, we only knew of 3 works of hers that were authenticated. And now there are 17. So there's been a lot of work. This is from a manuscript page, so it's hugely blown up. And it's the Adoration, Mary, Joseph, and the Child. Can you see these 2 women? They're 2 nuns. Her sister also joined the convent. So is it a self-portrait? I don't know. I have absolutely no idea and no way to verify it. This, I will tell you, is in a small corner of a painting that we do know that she did. And it's the Last Supper. And this is a portion of it. It's been restored. There's the conservator who did it, one of the many conservators who did it. It's humongous. It's in San Marco. And somewhere, not here, but somewhere, on the piece, is this, that in Latin says, Pray for the paintress. Well, how perfect. I mean, she was a nun. You can't, she may have signed her pieces, but she's not going to brag about what she's doing. You can't. You're a nun. You're supposed to be humble. But she let us know. Pray for the paintress. There are paintresses. All righty. So first artist we'll talk about is Kathavina Von Hammerson. She's from, we'd call it the Low Countries, Flemish, Flanders. Her father was an artist. That's how she learned her trade. This is her self-portrait. And she is the first artist ever to create a self-portrait, man or woman, of an artist sitting at an easel. So she has that distinction. So I saw this painting by her and I thought, young woman playing the virginals, which is a spinet, it's a keyboard. And I thought, oh, that's another self-portrait. No, it's not. It's her sister. Her sister, Christina. Okay, close enough. And then these are, she made a living. She was written about by, art historians, kind of. These are some portraits that she did of, if you think about Flanders and Holland and that whole area, it was a fairly prosperous area. And so ordinary people, kind of ordinary people, the bourgeoisie anyway, could pay an artist to create their self-portrait. There's no photography then. And so she indulged them, and she did. And the thing that I really love about these few works of hers, there are many others. When I look at them, have any of you been to Flanders or Netherlands? You know how the light and the sky is a particular way? It's when I went to Holland, I was like, oh, now I understand why the Dutch painters painted as they did, because it's the light they had available to them. Things are a little muted. Yeah, but still wonderful. All right, Artemisia Gentleski. We own this painting. It is not on display right now because it was shipped to Detroit for the gigantic Artemisia Gentleski exhibit at the Detroit Institute of Arts. She did several versions of this, David and Bathsheba. Oh, there's so much I could say about it, but I'm not going to, because, all right, we're doing okay. Like many women born prior to the 19th century, she discovered painting through her, anybody know? Her father, yes, Orazio Gentleski, who was a follower of Caravaggio. And at the very end, I'll show you a book that is a fictionalized, but it's a story of her life. We do know a lot of details. I'm not going to get into the sensational part. There are a lot of sensational things that happen. Not going to do it. But eventually she started in Rome. That's where her father was, in her father's house, learning, working with him, working super hard. She had to have a chaperone every time she left the house. But she was eventually married, which was really good because of something awful that had happened to her just before that, and moved to Florence. So she quickly earned a reputation as a very talented artist, and I'm going to show you some of her pieces. I mean, there are many, but they're astounding. They're just astounding. She lived in Milan, London, Naples, and it was rare at that time that women could work independently and travel independently, and she did. So on your left is Gentleski's self-portrait as Allegory of Painting. All that means is she's a stand-in, she's a symbol for painting. And really only a woman could do this, right? Because, I mean, a male could do it, but then it would have to be a self-portrait of him. right? So she's a woman, so she could create it. And anyway, yes, so it's just a wonderful piece. And this is yet another, she did a lot of self-portraits, but never as herself. She was busy doing all kinds of things. This one is her self-portrait as St. Catherine of Alexandria. And there are, for those of you who are into saints, there are things on her crown, and then this wheel, allude to, bits of her story that I won't get into. Anyway, that's at the National Gallery in London. Now, keep this in mind. Do you see one here that looks a little bit familiar? The one in the middle? Okay. Well, that's yet another self-portrait of hers. And it's called, this is self-portrait as a lute player. That was originally attributed to her father. Now we know it was her. The middle one is her self-portrait as a female martyr. So could have been St. Catherine, could have been any female martyr. And this is probably one of my favorite. I've never seen it. When I go back to Italy, I'm going to. It's oil painting on canvas, is on a ceiling of a place called the Casa Buonarroti. Maybe you've heard of Michelangelo Buonarroti, okay? That was a building that he lived in, that his nephew and then his great-nephew inherited. And his great-nephew was determined to preserve this. It is a museum now, to preserve his uncle's works, to preserve his uncle's legacy. And one of the ways he did that was having important artists of the time come and paint, murals, and this whole ceiling in this one I saw a video of. It's just fantastic. And this is her self-portrait as Allegory of Inclination. And that's one of the 8 attributes that the great nephew of Michelangelo felt that his uncle had. And what that means is creativity. I'll just give you a quick, so Allegory of Creativity. And another kind of a funny thing about this is when it was first painted, I think it was this piece that wasn't there, this covering. But the great nephew was embarrassed, I guess. I mean, it's on the ceiling, for heaven's sakes. And had another artist paint over it. So when they restored it, they were aware that it was a later edition and had lots of conversations about, should we restore it back to Gentleski, her original? And they made their decision. They said, well, this is part of the history of the painting. And so it remains, and it has been restored, which is really cool. Gentleski, she's just absolutely amazing. This is another of her giant paintings. That was one thing she painted huge. I mean, she had to get up on ladders, and this is one of the many strong female figures that she depicted. This is Judith beheading Holofernes, and her accomplice is, I think it's her servant or something. And there are a lot of artists painted this. And there's another one, in fact, that she painted that was her holding the head of Holofernes. It was just really a popular topic. So, and so her father was a follower of Caravaggio, as was she. She was the only woman who followed the tenets of Caravaggism, as they call it. So the dramatic light and dark, the drama of her paintings, which we see. They're all dramatically lit. And she was just bold. God love her. All right. I could talk about her forever, but I won't. The next woman we will talk about is Judith Leister. She is also from the Low Country. I guess it would now be called Netherlands. Many of her, hold on. So this is her self-portrait, very unusual for its time. It is a self-portrait. It's not her representing creativity or her representing grace or something else. And she's real casual, isn't she? She's like, hello, here I am. Now, she probably didn't wear that while she was painting her self-portrait because of the mess, if any of you have ever painted, but she did want to, you know, especially the lace. Holy cow. All right, so this is her self-portrait, which I just think is so endearing. And this is, she did these wonderful, wonderful paintings, lots of portraits, genre scenes, you know, scenes of everyday life. And this one on the left has a number of titles. It's called Man Offering Money to a Woman. It also called The Proposition. Early on, people thought, well, this is a prostitute. You know, why else would a man get that close to her and talk to her without her chaperone? And we're not entirely sure what the situation was. I'd like to think she was just as pure as her white blouse, and it was some creep. Okay, not to put too fine a point on it. So Leister's interesting because a lot of her works were misattributed to Franz Halls. Hey. Okay, so her initials, J, L, and then she would put a star. Her last name means lead star. So that was kind of a play on her name. And when they found some of these pieces that were misattributed to Franz Halls, because once she died, Halls was the one with the reputation. And even a couple hundred years later, at the auction house, they want it to be a Halls. They don't want it to be a Leister. Who's she? Nobody remembers her, right? And so we have the Serenade from 1629. She married in, well, I think sometime after this painting, the Serenade. These two pieces, remarkably, when she married an artist, her production decreased. Can you imagine? Well, she was, for one thing, she was probably helping her husband, who was a more famous artist. She's helping, you know, everyone in, you know, we're all working together. These two were done after her marriage. And this one in particular, I'm really fond of because remember when we had the exhibit from of the Dutch masters and those incredible tulip, you know, every time I'd see one of those tulips, I was just like, oh, are you kidding me? The Dutch were just incredible. And this is it's on a painting on parchment, an entire book of tulips. I wonder if they'll let me in to see it. I'm not even sure where in Amsterdam it is. I'm not sure if it's at the Rijksmuseum or where, but I'd love to leaf through that. That would be just super fun. So Franz Halls, who was he? Well, he painted that and lots of other wonderful Dutch paintings, genre scenes. And this is hers, done somewhat later than him, but it's hers. And what they found when they found some that had been misattributed to Halls, that the signature, the JL with a star, had been crudely formed into an FH. And they were able to get that off. And you're like, no, here, she did it. It was her. It was her. So yeah. I love her. I think her work is just, I don't know, it's exquisite. Dramatic. I love the lighting. All right, next artist. Okay. Elizabeth Vigée-Lebrun. She was Marie Antoinette's favorite painter. Her father had been an artist, died when she was young, 12. And he had taught her somewhat, and she was talented. And so her mother made sure that her education could continue. She couldn't go to arts. She couldn't have an apprenticeship. She couldn't go to an art school. So in these days, how did artists learn? Maybe you've seen people doing it. It doesn't happen very often here. You'll see it at the Metropolitan sometimes. You'll see it in Europe. Artists are there now doing what? Copying the masters. Absolutely. Good idea. Learn from the best. They may be gone, but I can, and I remember when I lived in Cleveland, I thought, I want to be one of those artists copying the masters. But I was so busy getting my degree and having fun and just reveling in all the beautiful artwork at the Cleveland Museum of Art that I never did. I actually never have set up I haven't done that in a museum. Maybe one day I will soon. So on the left, we have an early portrait that Lebrun did of Marie Antoinette, and it's a very conservative portrait. She's in court dress. She's all corseted. There are all these symbols of her importance, and the hat and everything. This is another one she did that actually caused a scandal. It is Marie Antoinette, and she's in a chemise dress. It's muslin. It's covering everything. Yeah, it's covering more than that one is. And why was that so upsetting? Well, there were several reasons. A chemise was commonly at that time worn under clothing, so like a slip. For those of you who remember slips. It also was muslin, but it was a dress. I mean, it's a dress and muslin. And Marie Antoinette was often, her loyalty to France was often questioned. And England, it did all the importing of muslin. So how dare her be painted in a muslin dress? She should be painted in the silks and the finery of France, right? Well, it still exists, which is great. They're both at the Metropolitan. And then two other portraits, Joseph Vernet. She made this portrait of him. I'd never heard of him, but that doesn't mean anything because there's a lot I don't know. He was a mentor of hers. So she copied, and her mother, this is awesome. Her mother accompanied her to the galleries because she had to be chaperoned. She couldn't say, just go on, go do your painting, sweetheart. No, she was there with her, okay? And at the age of 15, Lebrun was earning enough through her portraiture that she was supporting her widowed mother and her younger brother. So this is, let's see, a duchess, the Duchess of Chartres. And she probably is the person who introduced Lebrun to Marie Antoinette. So we have her to thank for that, which is quite wonderful. And now we have some self-portraits by Lebrun. This is from 1790 on the left, Metropolitan. And then on the right, this is in the Hermitage. She's making another drawing, not of herself. But, you can see prominently the brushes, the easel, this is what I do. This is who I am. Yet another self-portrait of hers that's at the Kimball Museum in Fort Worth, Texas. And the bow, I wanted to call it red, but it's actually more of a pinkish magenta cerise. And I love so much about it. Aesthetically, the blush on her cheeks echoed by the cummerbund and the color of these wonderful ribbons. And then this is her self-portrait with her daughter. She did marry Lebrun, who made off with all her money by gambling, and we won't get into that. She eventually got away from him, but she had this beautiful daughter, and She painted her, showing her loving love of her daughter. You may not notice that she is smiling. She's showing some teeth. You know, I'm saying, you know, from the 21st century. Well, that was unseemly, evidently. Some critics said, this is incredible. Showing her teeth in a smile appalled the Academy. They were mostly men. Well, yeah, because she wasn't admitted. This affectation is particularly out of place for a mother. Okay, then. So Marie Antoinette, she was Marie Antoinette's favorite portraitist. She did all the, you know, nobility and famous people in Paris. And then maybe you've heard about what happened to Marie Antoinette. There was, you know, some issues. And that put Vigée Lebrun in danger. So she eventually painted over 600 portraits. That is a lot of portraits. And each is just as fabulous as these that we see here. One of the portraits is upstairs. I forget which gallery, but it's in the upstairs. And I'll show you an image of that in a minute. She and her daughter stole out of France the night that Versailles was mobbed. And first they went to Italy. She went to Rome, then she went to Naples, where Marie Antoinette's cousin was the Queen of Naples. You know, it helps to have friends like that in high places. And, but eventually she really just had to get out of Europe, what was considered Europe at the time. And she went to Russia and painted loads and loads of wonderful portraits. This one is in our collection. This is another self-portrait of her. I just think she's so sweet, with a straw hat, and it's referencing a Peter Paul Rubens. This one I found out. So she is called Varvara Ivanova Latimorski. How did I do? That's pretty good. Okay. And who was she? Well, she was, you know, wealthy enough to have parents or someone, you say, paint the picture. She's also depicted in, you know, Roman or Greek robes. So that was like a fashion. And we think that she was the illegitimate daughter of the composer Rimsky-Korsakov and Countess Stroganova. I don't know who she is, but I know who Korsakov is. Pretty amazing. I'm great with time. I am going to get through all of these. All right. How many of you have ever heard of this artist? I had never, I just came across it as I was doing the research. Sarah Biffen, English. On her birth certificate, it says, born without arms or legs. She did have vestiges of her arms and legs, but she didn't have hands and feet. And this is what she looked like. And she sat, you know, she had to be carried from place to place. Regardless of that, she learned to read, she learned to write, she learned to paint, she learned to sew. That's harder than painting. My granddad was a tailor. Trust me, I know. And she, this is contemporary at the time, said she painted with a fine miniature brush, which was fixed to the stump of what would have been her right arm. And it is surprising to see how minute was the finish of her work. So this is a self-portrait of hers. It's about that big, teeny, teeny, teeny. She did these miniatures. And then this is a lithograph done by an English artist of her. And Dickens wrote about her. I mean, lots of people, she was very famous. In fact, you know, kind of infamous. This is a poster about her, declaring her an eighth wonder of the world. So you can imagine think of a sideshow, think of a carnival where there are all kinds of people doing amazing things. And there she was doing her paintings. So she was absolutely, remarkable. This painting, I'd like to see this in person. Study of Feathers. Will you look at that? Will you look at that detail? Yes, she used a fine brush. How did she control? I mean, absolutely amazing. I'd love to see that in person. I don't know where it is in the collection, but I'm still researching. And then this is the royal family actually commissioned Sarah Biffen to do portraits of all of them, miniatures. That was a thing, that like they would be put in a frame and they were done on ivory or cardboard. And then this is a portrait, a watercolor portrait. And this texture that we're seeing here, I don't think that's the texture of the watercolor. I think it's just not a very good reproduction. It's the best I could find. And it's probably small also. So when you blow things up, they look kind of funky. But there was Queen Victoria. She painted Queen Victoria. Later in life, she made several self-portraits. This self-portrait, again, this is a miniature. It's at the National Galleries of Scotland. So it's about, 2 3/4 inches. It's tiny. It's either on ivory or cardboard. They're unsure. And, she painted herself as very fashionable, a turban and the curls and where her disability isn't evident, right? Which I think is pretty interesting. And then here's another one from, actually it's an earlier self-portrait. And, I love artists are so much fun. They like to brag. Look how I can paint that curly hair. Look how I can paint that lace. Oh, and a glass. And then, now we've got this fabulous rug. I mean, look at all the textures and the feather in the hair. I mean, just amazing. And this, what another report I've read is that her brush was pinned to her dress up here. So she used her mouth and the whatever still she had on the arm to control her brush. I mean, it's just absolutely amazing. So talk about defying the odds. She continued to paint up until her last days. Queen Victoria awarded her a civil list pension so that she, would be supported. Okay. Rosa Bunner. I could go on and on about her, but I'm not going to. Very famous, the most famous female and the richest female artist of her time in France. This is one of her most famous paintings. It is at the Metropolitan. It is huge. It is, I'm going to get this right, 8 by gigantic. It's big. Here we go. 8 by like 12. It's a gigantic, and it's at the Metropolitan. Queen Victoria, who I mentioned when talking about Sarah Biffen, loved this painting, was really entranced with it. It traveled, can you imagine a big painting like that, traveling from France to England so that Queen Victoria could see it. She loved it, but someone in the US snagged it and donated it to the Metropolitan. I'm not quite sure who. We have a Rosa Bunner in our collection. It is up presently. And she is known for being a painter of extraordinary skill, but of animals. And how did she get so good at that? So, and I apologize, the registrar was able to give me this image of our painting, which I've seen, because I remember when I was with the docents here, it's a beautiful painting, but sorry about the light. It's just not the best quality. And here she is, painting animals in such lifelike resemblance. It's absolutely amazing. Well, how did she figure out how to paint artists? Well, she went to slaughterhouses. She went to markets. She went places that were messy, couldn't wear a dress. I mean, she wore dresses, the long, but she had to get from the police permission to dress as a man, why she could be arrested. And so this was renewable every 6 months. And so she could wear pants and then some fancy coat. I can't even imagine painting under those circumstances in slaughterhouses. And it's how artists learn, they do anatomy and so forth. And she loved animals. She had lots of animals. What's so interesting about Bunner, her reputation declined after her death, although she was super famous at the time. She never married. She gave her this chateau that she had outside of Paris that was just chock full of her artwork and her sketches, and it had a big property around it. It was near Fontainebleau. And she'd go out, anyway, this is a recent photograph of her studio. So this is an old building that what's the word I'm going to use? Didn't improve with age. So Bunner, it was a little decrepit when she bought it. It's fine with her. She, made a nice studio for herself. She had, all the rooms that, and she had enough money to maintain it. But when she gave it in her will to her female companion, much younger than she, who had cared for her at the very end, she was not well at the end. Her heirs, it's hard. It's like the big English houses. They're just hard to maintain. The roofs and they have, weird plumbing, and it's, the stuff water dripping down the walls, and, okay, and so a woman, this is incredible. Her name is Catherine Brault, Brault. In 2017, it was put up for sale for $2.5 million. Catherine Brault was divorced, 3 grown children, did not have the funds. But the family of the heir agreed to let her pay in installments. And she also got some grants from the French government, from local government. I mean, she's doing everything she can to, a little bit, nutty, as my mother would say. What are you doing? And she is restoring it and going through all the attics. She's finding drawing after drawing after drawing. During COVID, she, like a lot of us, was stuck at home. And she went into all the attics, and she's been archiving these drawings. I mean, things that no one knew about that were Rosa Bunner's. And this is a fairly recent photo of the staircase to her attic. I think it's the attic. Yes. How does Brault support all this, Catherine Brault? Well, you can go there now that COVID is kind of over. I'm going. I can't wait to go. You can stay there overnight. There's a tea room. I'm going to do both. I'm going to stay overnight and go to the tea room. And here, and there are these, and I'm picturing Catherine Brault, probably a woman just a bit younger than me. She has these 3 grown children, daughters, who are helping her in this effort. She also has art historians and historians who will go and help her archive and research and write about things that nobody knew about. So she's got a lot of help. So this is a painting by Bunner. This is a portrait of Bunner by her young friend, who cared for her at the end of her life. I do have a better picture of that, but not with me. Okay. Columbus Museum of Art not only has the coal carriers, which is about this big, but also owns this photograph of Rosa Bunner that's not on display. And guess who it was donated by? Nanette Macy Jones. I just had to mention that. I just thought that was, I know she and George have donated quite a few things, and I thought, that's so perfect. And I have known each other a long time. This is not a self-portrait. This is Anne Elizabeth Klumpke's portrait of her friend. And she has a dress on, everything's good. There is one self-portrait of Bunner. It is at the Uffizi. It's in something called the Vasari corridor, which goes from the Uffizi, makes its way across the Arno, and then connects somehow with the Pitti Palace. And it was done a long time ago. And they use that as their self-portrait corridor. It's closed now because there's some concern about its safety because of when it was built. They're hoping to reopen it soon. But all through the years, the Uffizi would ask artists to make self-portraits for their Vasari corridor. And this she did when she was quite young. So she was famous even then. This is another one. This is not a self-portrait. This is a portrait of her by Edouard Dubuffet. She's young. She's, probably about that same age. But I think it's kind of a self-portrait because the bull, beautifully painted, with Edouard Dubuffet's permission, was painted by Rosa Bunner. So is she the bull? Or are she and the bull just as tenacious? I don't know. Yeah, I'm not calling her. She's an incredibly strong woman. Now, here's another one. Okay, I just found this about a week ago. Another not self-portrait of Bunner, done by Georges Achille Fold, that was a pseudonym, was a woman, despite the name Georges. She's painted in pants. She's painted with some of her, artwork around, and again was invited to paint the depictions of animals. So this is a joint piece by Bunner and Georges Achille Fold, which I just think is wonderful, and I love it. It reminds me of the portrait. Looks very much like her. And I'm glad that someone finally depicted her wearing pants, of all things. All right, here's another. How am I doing? Oh. Marie Besh Kurtzeff died at 25. She was born in Ukraine, brought to Europe by her mother when she was young, educated, very well educated, very interested in her own learning. And I can't believe I'm going to say this, but you know how people have become brands? I'm not going to mention the person's name, but her initials are KK. Okay. So her name, and she's like a brand kind of, and I won't go. Marie Besh Kurtzeff was way ahead of the 20th century and the 21st century. She was determined. She kept a diary from the time she was 14 till she died at 25 of consumption. This is a self-portrait. She wrote, there were thousands of pages in this journal, and she really wanted to be known after her death. She knew she was going to die as a famous artist. Maybe for her paintings, that didn't happen right away. But for her journal, 3 years after she died, it was published, much edited, in French. It was published in English. It was a sensation, and you still can get a copy of it. And it's her from the age of 14 on talking about her daily life as a young woman enjoying Paris. God bless her. There's a photographic portrait of her. This is a photograph of her studio hung with her own paintings. She was very prolific. This is, I think it's a 1985 version of the Journal of Marie. And how about painting from the live model? Well, this is by Marie. There is a nude model, sort of covered up because, women do need to be protected. And what's really interesting, in a way, this is a self-portrait because she painted herself all in black. She knew she was going to die. She knew she just wasn't well, right? And look what's hanging right above her head. Okay, you would find that in an art school anyway, but the positioning of it, I just think is super interesting. An early photograph of her, and then here she is as a child in traditional Ukrainian dress. I just thought those were very sweet. Another woman you probably have never heard of, Suzanne Valadon. She was the subject of a huge show at the Barnes Foundation that just closed in January. I did not see it. I ordered the catalog. She was, the name of the show at the Barnes Foundation was Model, Painter, Rebel. So she was born to a washerwoman. She didn't have means. How does she make a living? Well, she worked at a florist. She, did what she was self-taught. And then she posed for artists like Renoir, Lautrec. Her original name was not Suzanne. Lautrec gave her the name Suzanne in reference to the biblical theme of Susanna and the elders. So this is an early self-portrait. A couple years later, another self-portrait of hers. There we go. Did I skip one? Yes, I think I skipped another one. Nope, okay. So here's another, we'll call it a self-portrait. This is her mother, her son, and her young artist husband. She got rid of the first one. Her son is named Maurice Utrillo. Have you heard of him? Yeah, the Barnes collected all kinds of Maurice Utrillos. No Valadons. Oh, they finally got smart and had this fabulous exhibit. And then this is a photograph of, again, Maurice Utrillo, her artist husband, and then Suzanne Valadon. And these are, I just wish I had seen them in person, these phenomenal. So the reclining figures, which is women are often, painted and reclining, but usually they're nude. They're not here. And you can see her color was very influenced by Renoir, Lautrec, all that was going on at the time, this very bold use of color. This is a painting by Renoir that she modeled for. Red hair, okay? And this, I'm gonna start crying, is a self-portrait of her in her later years. Go girl. That's who it is in the mirror. Yes, that's you in the mirror, I say to myself. Okay, Cecilia Beau. Now, the next two artists are both American, and they're somewhat similar. They lived at a similar time. Cecilia Beau, we have a wonderful piece of hers. That piece, it's up in one of the hallways. Mrs. Richard Lowe Devine. She was a portraitist. She was a society portraitist. And there's a self-portrait by her and then another self-portrait by her. But that's how she made her living. She refused to marry. And I could tell you a lot more about her, but I'm running out of time. Mary Cassatt, another American, chose not to marry, much to her father's displeasure. She wanted to be an artist. She's like, these two things are going to conflict. I can't marry and bear children and all of that, So anyway, two photographs of her. This is a watercolor and gouache self-portrait of her that's at the National Portrait Gallery. A later self-portrait of her that is held at the Metropolitan. And this is Edward Degas' portrait of her. And she hated this portrait. So that's why I made it really small, because she just didn't like it. She didn't care for it. Cassatt, she was not in my first art history book, but I knew a lot about her. And she was, her compositions if you look at the composition of the boating party, it's very unusual. The point of view is very unusual. This is a portrait of her mother reading Le Figaro. Her mother was very well educated, and her mother was behind her all the way. The father supported her, like money-wise, but he would never pay for her art supplies. But the mother was, very faithful to her. This cassade is a pastel. It's up in one of the galleries in the front of the museum. It's just a beautiful piece. And I could not find Susan comforting the baby. It might not be on display right now. I ran around, but that's an oil on canvas. And then she, like a lot of the artists, she exhibited with the Impressionists, great friend of Edgar Degas. And they did printmaking. And at that time, the French artists were very influenced. This was a time period that was called Japonism, where the artists were very influenced by Japanese prints, just like Van Gogh was. In the last show, you even saw some prints, right? And so we've got print. I think this might be a paint. Oh no, I'm sorry, that is a print. And they're all at the, is that true? National Gallery. Yeah. But she did women, children, in scenes of ordinary everyday life. She was not a society portraitist. Sadly, oopsie, last 15 years of her life, her eyesight failed her. So how did she, make a living? She advised collectors. And mostly, American. Well, she'd lived in Paris for all these years and she knew all the artists. So she was like a broker, kind of. She would advise people on their art collections. So my friend Peggy, who's in the audience, when I told her I was doing this talk, she said, "Oh, you'll for sure talk about Frida Kahlo." And I said, "I don't know. I hope I don't run out of time." One person already told us that they had heard of Frida Kahlo. How many of you have heard of her? Okay. How many of you have seen the film about her? Okay. Remarkable piece of artwork on its own. This is a photograph of Frida Kahlo. She was born to a German father and a Mexican mother. A self-portrait. She did loads and loads and loads of them. Very often dressed in the, I don't know if you would call it the ethnic, the dress of the Mexican people, not fancy finery, okay? And that she was very proud of her heritage, her Mexican heritage. This is an early self-portrait, I'm sorry, the quality is terrible, that she dedicated to Leon Trotsky. And she and her husband, Diego Rivera, were very active in communist causes. And she was just amazing. Sadly, I have 2 minutes left. She had polio when she was a child. And then when she was 17, she was involved in this horrible streetcar accident. I will not go into the details. And she'd already been admitted to the, this national, very prestigious college in Mexico. She wanted to become a doctor. That dashed her dreams. I mean, it was bad. And so she had a lot of surgeries and often had to wear these braces. And you've probably seen photographs of her with, casts from here to here. And then she has her paints with her. She's painting from bed. I mean, she was a determined woman. This is called the Two Fridas. This is her dressed in her wedding gown and then in some Mexican traditional dress. And she did this soon after she and Rivera divorced. So she's saying we're really all connected. These two Fridas, it may seem like two people, but. And then this is the only self-portrait she did of herself painting or, at an easel. And it's Dr. Farrell who, in the last, I'd say 3 years of her life, she was in excruciating pain. She was just not, she really suffered. And he conducted several surgeries. And alas, really, they couldn't resolve there was just so many issues, bone-wise and tissue-wise, and she died at a young age in 1954. But here she is honoring that doctor who helped her keep going. Oh, this kills me. Okay, it's 3:00. Alice Neal, amazing. Next time I give a talk, I'll talk all about her. I will quickly tell you, she loved, that's her portrait of Andy Warhol after he was shot. She often invited her sitters to pose naked or in not all their clothes. And, no, I didn't mean to do that. Go back on. Walker, can you turn it back on, or do I have to? Thank you. Okay, she lived in Spanish Harlem. She depicted people she ran into. None of them were famous. Alenka, and this is a later one, I think it's from the 1960s. And she just was interested in this man. She found out later that he was a draftee. And that must have been for Vietnam. And his name was James Hunter. She often would focus on the faces and then leave everything else to the imagination. This thing's coming off. She did portraits of mothers and children. This is her daughter, her granddaughter. But this is what I want to get to. Oh, I love these photos of her. What a spirit. And this is her self-portrait. And just like Suzanne Valadon, she said, I'm old, I'm wrinkled, and I'm posing without my clothes. Sue me. She worked and worked and worked. She was not recognized until her 60s. She kept working in realistic portraits. She just kept doing it. It didn't matter. She didn't want to be fashionable. She had a hard life. Her children had a hard life. And eventually she was discovered. So this is a phenomenal painting it's at the Smithsonian. I need to go back and visit it. And just real quick, see the blue striped chair? That must have been in her studio. So, an amazing woman. Okay, and I'm not going to talk about Elizabeth Catlett, though I want to. This is a beautiful self-portrait she did with silver pencil on black paper. African-American, descendant of freed slaves, spent most of her life living in Mexico, wonderful printmaker, another self-portrait of hers. And this you've probably seen, sharecropper. Lino cut, very well known for her printmaking. Okay, it's 3 minutes after. Take a picture of this. So, Fierce Dreamer, these are some of my sources, and the dining room table is just full of stuff. So Fierce Dreamers is a novelistic story of Artemisia Gentleski, for those of you who want more of those details. And we don't know if everything's true about it, but it's a lovely book. It was published fairly recently. This book, Mirror and the Palette, is, when Annette and I were chatting one day, I said, do you know about this book? And it just came out, I don't know, sometime during the pandemic. I've lost track of time. And 500 Years of Women's Self-Portraits. I'm like, cool, I'm getting that book. And I think I know most of them. No, I didn't. Never had heard of them. So Higgy did a lot of the research that I depended on. This is a more recent book. The title I love, The Trouble with Women Artists, Reframing the History of Art. That's a fairly recent book. And it's quite wonderful. It has short bios of the artists and then, images of their work. And this is available on Amazon by her grandson, Andrew Neal. And it is, I've seen the trailer. I haven't seen the whole thing. I think I can now. Incredibly poignant and honest as her self-portrait was. So I'm happy to entertain questions. I know I've gone over, for so long. Thank you so much for your kind attention. Thank you. And any questions that are just, you know what? I'm going to let you float off. And if you have a question of me, anyone have a pressing question, they just have to ask it. Okay, come up and see me later. you can talk to me individually, and I'll answer the question if I can. I don't know all the answers, although I used to think I did. So, again, thank you so much for your kind attention. Get up and stretch. I hope you learned about some really amazing women who were way ahead of their times. And so, Carol, you're a docent at the Wexner. Had you heard of most of these artists?
I've heard of most of them.
Okay. Yeah. So and Jeannie, did you know about most of these? You're another PhD in art. Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. Anyway, thank you so much. And hello to my brothers and sisters who get to watch this on Zoom across the country later. Unless you've already cut me off.